Hey, peace. What's happening, everyone? What I deal with?
Recognize royalty. Recognize royalty. Gotta recognize it. Recognize royalty. Like they ain't got eyes to recognize royalty.
I can feel.
Recognize royalty.
I can see.
Recognize royalty.
Now I recognize
Royalty.
royalty's eyes.
Royalty.
I can see.
Recognize royalty.
I can love again.
Recognize royalty.
Now I recognize.
I recognize it.
Royalty.
I recognize
Royalty.
passion.
Blessings once again. As usual, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. All of that helps. Blessings. So today I want to continue the conversation about slavery and whether America was built on slavery or not. My contention is that America was not built on slavery. And as usual, I'm going to, just do a little bit of a chat GPT search and see what we can come up with. So the first question I'm going to ask ChatGPT is, how was abolition of slavery in America inspired by the American Civil War? And it says the abolition of slavery in America was deeply shaped and ultimately accelerated by the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. The war turned from a fight to preserve the Union into a revolutionary conflict that led to the end of slavery. So the war did not start off to end slavery. The war started to preserve the Union and ultimately led up to a fight for the abolition of slavery. So let's just dive a little more into it. It says, here's how. Number one, slavery as the root cause of the war. The Civil War erupted over the expansion of slavery into new territories and states. So that is the root cause of the Civil War, was the expansion of slavery. The South wanted slavery to expand into other states, including northern and western states. And the North did not want slavery to expand. And so for that reason, the South wanted to secede. It says Southern states seceded primarily to protect the institution of slavery, which they saw as vital to their economy and social order. So the expansion of slavery was vital to the South. Slavery had to expand outside of the states where it was legal in order for, the South to maintain its social order and its economy. It says the North initially fought to preserve the Union, not abolish slavery. So the South wanted to secede because the North did not want slavery to expand. And so the North was fighting to prevent the South from seceding while protecting their right to not have slavery expand. But I think the two are kind of one and the same. Like if there was no North, if the North was not trying to prevent slavery from expanding, the South would not have seceded. And it's because the South wanted to secede that the North went to war. And I think that should be pretty clear. So slavery is at the heart of it, even though it says, it's to preserve the Union. They were preserving the Union because the South wanted to secede because of the North's position on the expansion of slavery. But let's read on a little more. Emancipation as a war strategy. As the war dragged on, Abraham Lincoln realized that abolishing slavery would weaken the Confederacy and give the North a moral cause. So it was as the war progressed that Lincoln the idea of abolishing slavery became a war strategy, if you will. So even though abolishing slavery was not the original reason for the war, we can say that it was preventing the expansion of slavery that was the original cause for the war. And there has been movements to abolish slavery in the North since America gained its independence. From the birth of America, there were calls to end slavery. And so that has been a rallying cry in the North since the birth of the nation. And so Lincoln saw that as a moral cause and a way to rally the troops around, that idea of ending slavery, and not just stopping the expansion, but abolishing it. It says in 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing enslaved people in Confederate-held territories. This didn't free all slaves, but it shifted the war's focus and prevented European nations, especially Britain and France, from supporting the Confederacy. Yeah, and that's very interesting. So apparently the British and French had apparently already ended slavery or abolished slavery in their respective countries. And so that was a way for Lincoln to get the British and the French to sympathize with their cause, or at least to not support the South. Black troops and public sentiment. Nearly 200,000 Black men served in the Union Army and Navy after emancipation became a war aim. So after emancipation became a war aim, the goal was to end slavery. It says nearly 200,000 Black men served in the Union Army and Navy after emancipation became a war aim. So Lincoln's strategy apparently worked, and that may have been a part of his strategy, was to get more Black men to serve. And a way to do that is to promise them the end of slavery. And so the Black men that served were fighting to end slavery. Expansion, not allowing the expansion of slavery, apparently wasn't enough of a impetus for Black men to fight. They were willing to fight only for the emancipation of slaves, and they weren't concerned with preserving the Union if it meant preserving slavery. Their goal was the emancipation of slavery. And, I don't think anyone can argue against that. It says their service helped change public opinion in the North, showing the capability, loyalty, and humanity of Black Americans. So even though abolition and the abolition movement was going on in the North since the inception of the nation, or from the beginning, public opinion about Black people was not very high. And the fact that they were willing to serve in the Army helped to, raise public opinion about Blacks. And it says it also increased pressure for total abolition. Legal abolition in the 13th Amendment. Legal abolition, the 13th Amendment. The war created a political climate in which abolition could finally succeed nationwide. In 1865, before the war ended, Congress passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery in all U.S. states and territories. The war made this possible by defeating the pro-slavery South, changing the national conversation about freedom and citizenship, giving political power to anti-slavery Republicans. So the war was really the starting point of that new conversation about freedom, about citizenship and who deserves citizenship. And it really cemented the Republican Party in America. Their whole anti-slavery movement, the Republican Party, was pretty much born out of the anti-slavery movement. So in summary, ChatGPT says the Civil War didn't start to end slavery, but it made abolition inevitable. It didn't start to end slavery. It started to prevent the expansion of slavery, not to end it, but later on, abolition was inevitable. It says the war exposed the centrality of slavery to Southern rebellion. It empowered abolitionist forces in government and society, and it created the conditions for the 13th Amendment, which formally ended slavery. Without the Civil War, slavery likely would have continued for decades or ended in a much more gradual, compromised way. So again, slavery was central to the South in terms of its role in the war or its participation in the war. The South wanted to secede for one reason only: slavery, to protect slavery. And not just to protect the slavery that already existed there, they wanted to expand slavery, because without that expansion, they wouldn't survive. So they had to survive, to expand in order to survive. And the North did not want that expansion. But the war exposed that centrality of slavery to the Southern Rebellion. Now, the next question I'm gonna ask ChatGPT is, why did Southern states want slavery to expand to new territories? It says Southern states wanted slavery to expand into new U.S. territories for several interconnected economic, political, and social reasons. Economic interests. Cotton agriculture and other plantation crops like sugar and tobacco depended heavily on slave labor. Southern elites believed expanding slavery would allow them to extend their agricultural empire, particularly into fertile Western lands. New territories meant more land, more slaves, and more profit, especially as soil in the older Southern states became exhausted. That kind of explains economically why the South wanted to expand slavery into those Western and other Northern states. They wanted to create that agricultural empire, and where they were, the land they were working was just becoming exhausted, so they needed new land for the cotton agriculture that for the most part their economy was centered around. 2, political power. The South feared being outnumbered in Congress by free states. By turning new territories into slave states, the South could maintain balance in the Senate and protect pro-slavery laws. They saw abolitionist movements and Northern population growth as threats to their way of life and needed to preserve national influence. Yeah, so that was another reason to expand into the West and Northern states, just for political power. They were outnumbered in Congress. So in order to fix that problem, they had to get land elsewhere and have representation and have just a greater representation in Congress. The next thing it mentions is the protection of the institution. Slavery's survival depended on expansion. If confined, it would become politically vulnerable and possibly be outlawed. Many Southern leaders believed slavery had to grow or die. They feared being surrounded by free states, which could inspire enslaved people to rebel or flee. Yeah, I think all of that is pretty straightforward. Yeah, they just couldn't be surrounded by all of these free states. If you're surrounded by all of these free states that are filled with abolitionists, at some point, the institution would have to die. So it was either grow or die, as it says. Number 4, ideological beliefs. Many Southerners viewed slavery not as a necessary evil, but as a positive good, a natural and divinely sanctioned order. Expanding slavery was seen as spreading civilization, especially in contrast to the free labor model in the North, which they criticized as exploitative. So they literally saw free labor model, the idea of the free market and the idea of people being paid for their work. They saw that as exploitative. That, I guess that's the same communist idea of the exploitation of workers. I'm wondering if that's the type of exploitation they were talking about, or if they were specifically talking about exploitation of Black people. I don't think they were talking about exploitation of the slave. I think they were talking more about exploitation of white workers and that free labor, that's what free labor represented. The next thing, fear of being marginalized. The rapid industrialization and population boom in the North meant the South was becoming a political minority. Expansion was a way to preserve the Southern way of life, which was built around slavery. So yeah, industrialization had a lot to do with the fears that Southerners had in terms of, their way of life being threatened, because industrialization came along with the idea of free labor, and that idea ran counter to what the South saw as important to their well-being. So in summary, ChatGPT says Southern states wanted slavery to expand to protect their economy, preserve political power, and secure the long-term survival of the slave system. The refusal of the North to allow slavery's expansion was one of the key factors that led to secession and the Civil War. Next question. And let me read that last sentence again. It says, the refusal of the North to allow slavery's expansion was one of the key factors that led to secession and the Civil War. And that just reiterates what we've been saying. It was the idea of not having slavery expand was the central point, or the central idea around why the South wanted to secede. Next question I asked is, why did the North not want slavery to expand? And it says the North opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories for moral, economic, and political reasons, but not always because Northerners were abolitionists. Here's a breakdown. Free labor ideology. Many Northerners believed in the superiority of free labor, where workers were paid wages and had the potential for social mobility. They feared that the spread of slavery would undermine the value of free labor, allow wealthy slaveholders to dominate the economy, and prevent small farmers and working class whites from competing fairly. So I guess they had their own interest. A lot of the Northerners weren't necessarily concerned with, freeing the slaves. They were more concerned with their own personal interests in terms of their jobs and their wages, and being able to compete. They didn't feel they were able to compete against these slave owners who, just had all these slaves that when they rented them out, if you will, they could rent them out at much lower wages to the slave owners, that is, than white folks could compete with. The free labor or the wages that these white workers were demanding was higher than the wages that slave owners would demand for their slaves. And so those white folks were against that. And it reminds me of what's going on even today with immigration. The idea even today with the immigration happening in America, The idea is that immigrants are willing to work for way lower wages, and that's undercutting, the wages of Americans, and just how much they're being paid for work. When illegals come in and are willing to do that work for so much cheaper, they just cannot compete with that. And so the idea is kind of similar. The next thing is political balance. And again, we're talking about why the North was against expansion. But it says Northerners worried that adding more slave states would give the South more power in the Senate and Electoral College. So the same concern that the South had, they wanted more power and the North did not want them to have it. They wanted to limit slavery's influence over federal laws and prevent a pro-slavery majority in Congress. Next, it says there was a moral opposition, especially among abolitionists. While most Northerners were not abolitionists, a growing number, especially in the 1930s to the 50s, viewed slavery as morally wrong. The abolitionist movement gained traction in churches, newspapers, and politics, pressuring leaders to oppose slavery's expansion. But again, I will say abolition and the abolition movement has been around since the inception of the country. And, it may not have been in large numbers, but as time went by, and especially leading up to the Civil War and during the Civil War, the number of people opposing, particularly the expansion of slavery, grew, and then even opposing, being in favor of the abolition of slavery, that the numbers of people also grew. Number 4, another reason they didn't want slavery to expand was the fear of a slave power conspiracy. Many Northerners believed Southern elites were trying to nationalize slavery and dominate U.S. politics. Events like the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and the Dred Scott decision in 1857 convinced them that the South wanted to force slavery on the entire nation. And again, as we read before, they were opposed to that because it ran counter to the idea of free labor and industrialization. The next reason they didn't want slavery to expand was the desire to preserve the West for whites. Some Northern opposition was not racially progressive. They wanted to reserve the new Western territories for white settlers only, free of both enslaved Black people and free Black people. Wow, that's interesting. So they didn't want slavery to expand simply because they didn't want Black people there, whether they were slaves or not. And that one is very interesting. They feared that the presence of slavery would make the West socially and economically unstable. Yeah, so it had nothing to do with, a moral stance against slavery. They just wanted to preserve an all-white state, if you will. And in summary, it says the North opposed the expansion of slavery because it conflicted with their economic model, political interests, and increasingly moral values. While not all Northerners wanted slavery abolished immediately, most did not want it to grow, and this division became a major cause of the Civil War. In summary, and again, the idea is that, is America built on slavery? And my position is that no, America is not built on slavery. If anything, America is built on ending slavery. It's after the abolition of slavery that I think America really started. And the vision of America from the Northern position, from the position of the North, America was about industrialization and free labor, and slavery went counter to that vision of America. And so they opposed the expansion of slavery, and then they just wanted to end it. And let's keep in mind that this is not very far removed from the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War, I think itself, is what sparked a lot of the abolition movement, because the idea of freedom that was fought for in the Revolutionary War, I think abolitionists tried to hold America accountable to that idea of freedom that they fought for, and they felt that that idea of freedom should be extended to all human beings, not just whites. And so the Revolutionary War itself is what sparked the idea of ending slavery, in my view. And then the Civil War is what kind of cemented it. So again, and in closing, I will say that America is absolutely not built on slavery. We can argue that America began after the Civil War, and if that is true, then America is not built on slavery. America is built on ending slavery. And without ending slavery, we would not have the America that we have today, all the freedoms that we value as Americans. All the American values today that we value would not exist if slavery continued to exist. And so America as we know it is not built on slavery. America as we know it is built on ending slavery. It's built on free labor. It's built on industrialization. And yeah, I think that should be pretty clear. So, without saying too much more, I think we'll just end it there. And only thing left to say is to please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Again, all of that helps to build a channel. So, just do it. Just do it. All right. Catch you on the next one. Peace.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Brought us from the motherland in bondage and chains. Bury our culture and change our names. They claim we're free, yet we are in pain. As long as there's life, there's a lot to gain. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. When God spoke his words, they said he was deranged. Marley sung his songs, they said the same. Malcolm X and Martin Luther fought relentlessly so we could be better. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Brought us from the motherland in bondage and chains. Bury our culture and change our names. They claim we're free, yet we are in pain. As long as there's life, there's a lot to gain. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, they say we are praise. Just because we're black, they say we are slaves. Speak of righteousness, sisters, they